What if the story of Georgia, a state known for its civil rights legacy, antebellum plantations, Appalachian foothills, and vibrant Southern culture, holds a genetic history far more intricate and unexpected than we ever imagined? A groundbreaking DNA study has uncovered deep ancestral layers, forged through centuries of migration, conflict, resilience, and cultural fusion. From the ancient footprints of Native American civilizations to the enduring legacy of the transatlantic slave trade, and from European settlement patterns to surprising global ties, Georgia's genetic past reveals a compelling saga of diversity and transformation. Let's dive into the hidden genetic heritage of Georgians and uncover what their DNA reveals about one of America's most iconic and complex southern states. Why Georgia's genetic heritage stands apart. Georgia's genetic heritage is distinct in the American South, shaped by its unique geography, colonial roots, and deep historical crossroads of migration. Unlike other southern states, Georgia has long been a gateway between regions, bordering the Atlantic Ocean, the Appalachian Mountains, and major river systems. This positioning made it a convergence zone for diverse populations over centuries, leaving a genetic imprint that stands out. Before European contact, the state that is now Georgia was home to thriving indigenous communities such as the Creek, Muskogee, Cherokee, and Yamasee. These tribes had rich cultures and complex societies whose descendants still contribute to Georgia's genetic tapestry. Although many were forcibly removed during the Trail of Tears, their legacy remains embedded in the DNA of many Georgians, often undetected until revealed through modern testing. Georgia also played a significant role in the transatlantic slave trade, particularly through the port of Savannah. The African populations brought to the state carried lineages from West and Central Africa, which remain visible today, especially in the African American communities of the coastal and southern regions. These genetic roots often align with specific regions of Africa, offering connections long severed by slavery. European settlers arrived from a wide array of backgrounds, including British, Scottish, Irish, French, and German, and their descendants formed the backbone of Georgia's rural and Appalachian communities. Later waves of immigrants from Latin America, Asia, and Eastern Europe added new threads to the genetic statescape. What makes Georgia's genetic heritage stand apart is this blending of deep ancestral roots with newer arrivals, all layered over centuries of cultural complexity and resilience. The result is a rich and varied population whose DNA holds stories that go far beyond what historical records alone can tell. Curious what your own DNA might reveal? Subscribe now to explore more hidden mysteries woven into America's genetic history, the study that redefined Georgia's ancestry. A groundbreaking genetic study conducted by researchers in collaboration with academic institutions across the South has redefined what we thought we knew about Georgia's ancestry. By analyzing thousands of DNA samples from volunteers across the state, the study revealed a far more diverse and intricate population history than traditional narratives had acknowledged. One of the study's most striking findings was the widespread presence of mixed ancestry in individuals across all racial and ethnic groups. Many participants who identified as having primarily European ancestry were surprised to discover traces of indigenous American and African DNA. Similarly, African American participants often found connections to multiple African regions, as well as unexpected European and Native ancestry, shaped by centuries of enslavement, migration, and survival. The researchers also traced distinct regional patterns within Georgia. In the mountainous northern counties, there was a strong presence of Scottish and Irish heritage, likely linked to early frontier settlements. Along the coast and through the southern plains, African ancestry was more concentrated, reflecting the legacy of the plantation economy and enslaved labor. In central Georgia, a complex blend of ancestries pointed to generations of intermingling shaped by economic, social, and political forces over time. What made the study so transformative was not just the data, but how it challenged people to rethink identity. DNA revealed hidden stories, family secrets, forgotten migrations, and erased lineages. For some, it confirmed long-told oral histories. For others, it opened entirely new chapters. Ultimately, the study did more than map ancestry. It helped Georgians better understand their place in a shared and evolving history, revealing that the state's population is not simply black or white, native or foreign, but a living mosaic created by centuries of resilience, movement, and unexpected connection. Georgia's genetic statescape, a map of migration. Georgia's genetic statescape tells the story of a state shaped by continuous movement of people, cultures, and histories. Long before it became one of the original 13 colonies, Georgia was home to indigenous peoples who had lived and migrated across the state for thousands of years. Tribes like the Muskogee, Creek, and Cherokee established complex societies whose descendants continue to carry and preserve genetic and cultural legacies, despite forced removals like the Trail of Tears. The arrival of European settlers, particularly from the British Isles, Germany, and France, introduced new lineages into the region. These groups primarily settled in the Appalachian foothills, Piedmont region, and along the Savannah River. Over time, their genetic markers concentrated in rural and mountainous areas, especially in the north and central parts of the state. Georgia's coastal plain and southern regions reflect a very different history, one shaped by slavery and the transatlantic slave trade. Enslaved Africans were brought through ports like Savannah and transported to plantations, leaving a lasting genetic presence that remains most visible today in African American communities across the Low Country and the Black Belt region. Their DNA shows deep connections to various regions of West Africa, including present-day Ghana, Nigeria, and Senegal. During the Reconstruction era and well into the 20th century, African Americans migrated northward in large numbers during the Great Migration, while new populations moved into Georgia's cities from Latin America, Asia, and the Caribbean in more recent decades. Today, Atlanta is one of the most culturally and genetically diverse metropolitan areas in the country, reflecting ongoing waves of immigration and interconnection. Together, these layers form a genetic map that illustrates how Georgia became a cultural crossroads. Its people, whether newcomers or descendants of ancient lineages, carry within them a living record of movement, adaptation, and shared history, uncovering Georgia's hidden ancestral roots. Beneath the familiar storylines of Southern heritage lies a deeper, often hidden, ancestral record that modern genetics is beginning to uncover. In Georgia, a state known for its proud traditions and layered history, DNA testing has revealed ancestral threads that challenge conventional understandings of identity and origin. Many Georgians carry ancestral connections they may have never imagined, traces of indigenous, African, European, and even Middle Eastern or Asian heritage. These findings reflect centuries of migration, colonization, displacement, and cultural blending that began long before Georgia became a state. For example, people with deep family roots in Georgia may be surprised to learn of distant ties to Native American tribes that were forcibly removed, or to African communities whose histories were nearly erased through slavery. Family records and oral histories, while invaluable, often contain gaps caused by systemic disruption, especially for African American and Native American families. Genetic analysis helps to fill in those gaps. It can trace family lines to specific regions of Africa or suggest indigenous ancestry that official records failed to preserve. In urban areas like Atlanta and Savannah, the diversity is even more pronounced. Immigration in recent decades has added layers of ancestry from the Caribbean, Central America, and Southeast Asia, enriching the state's genetic story even further. The hidden roots of Georgia are not just scientific curiosities, they are personal revelations. They connect individuals to a broader, more inclusive narrative about what it means to be Georgian. In a place where history is both celebrated and contested, DNA is becoming a powerful tool for rediscovery. It gives people the chance to reclaim stories, understand connections, and recognize that Georgia's true heritage is far more diverse and far more interconnected than many have previously known. From tribes to transplants, the DNA story of Georgia. The story of Georgia's population is one of profound transition, from ancient tribal nations to modern global transplants, each wave of settlement adding new layers to the state's genetic story. Long before European colonization, indigenous peoples such as the Creek, Cherokee, and Hitchiti thrived across the region, forming complex societies with extensive trade networks, agriculture, and spiritual traditions. Their DNA still echoes in the genomes of modern Georgians, even if cultural erasure and forced removal tried to wipe that history away. When British colonists established Georgia as a penal colony and agricultural hub, new European lineages entered the region. Settlers from Scotland, Ireland, Germany, and England brought their own customs and their own genetic markers. Over time, these groups established roots in the highlands and Piedmont, shaping the identity of rural Georgia. However, the largest demographic shift came through the transatlantic slave trade. Enslaved Africans brought to Georgia carried deep genetic histories from West and Central Africa. Their forced labor built much of the state's economy, especially in coastal areas like Savannah and inland plantations. Today, African American communities across Georgia reflect that ancestry, with genetic ties reaching back generations before slavery. In the modern era, Georgia, especially the Atlanta metropolitan area, has welcomed immigrants from all over the world. Families from Latin America, East Asia, the Middle East, and Africa have added entirely new dimensions to Georgia's DNA. From ancient tribal beginnings to global resettlement, Georgia's genetic story is a testament to movement, survival, and adaptation. Each strand of DNA tells part of a broader human story, of people who made homes, built communities, endured hardship, and passed on their heritage. This rich blend makes Georgia not just a southern state with a complicated past, but a living mosaic of global ancestry. The genetic echoes of Georgia's indigenous peoples. Long before Georgia's statehood and centuries before European contact, the state was home to indigenous peoples with deep cultural, spiritual, and familial roots. These Native American nations, including the Creek, Cherokee, Hitchiti, and Yuchi, lived on Georgia's states for thousands of years. They built mound complexes, managed vast agricultural systems, and created rich oral histories. Although many were forcibly removed during the 19th century, their genetic legacy continues to echo in the DNA of today's Georgians. Modern genetic research has shown that many individuals in Georgia, including those unaware of any native ancestry, carry DNA markers linked to southeastern tribal groups. These echoes often reflect a complex past of intermarriage, assimilation, and survival during times of displacement and erasure. The Indian Removal Act and events like the Trail of Tears scattered many indigenous families, but their genetic presence quietly endured. For African American and European descended Georgians alike, indigenous DNA often appears as a small but persistent element of ancestry. In some cases, it affirms long-held oral traditions. In others, it reveals lost histories that were never written down. For those whose native roots were obscured by systemic dislocation, DNA offers a form of silent testimony, proof of a heritage that persisted against the odds. Importantly, genetics does not replace cultural identity or tribal affiliation, but it can open the door to deeper understanding and reconnection. For many Georgians, discovering native ancestry is a starting point, an invitation to learn about the peoples who first called this state home. The DNA of Georgia's indigenous peoples still runs through the veins of its people and the soil of its state. These echoes remind us that before there was a state, a colony, or even a country, there was a vibrant and enduring indigenous presence, one that still lives on in the genes of Georgia. Genetics versus identity, what it means to be a Georgian. In Georgia, where identity is often rooted in family, tradition, and culture, the growing availability of genetic data is challenging long-held assumptions about ancestry. Many Georgians have grown up with specific ideas of who they are, shaped by oral histories, surnames, or regional affiliations. But DNA is beginning to complicate those narratives in ways both surprising and deeply personal. For some, discovering unexpected ancestry, whether indigenous, African, or European, can feel like a revelation. It may confirm whispered family stories or unearth histories that were lost or deliberately concealed. For others, it can be disorienting. A person raised in a white Southern family may find African ancestry. Someone identifying as African American may uncover connections to Native American or European lineages previously unknown. These discoveries can reshape how people understand their place in Georgia's larger historical story. But identity is more than genetic code. While DNA can reveal ancestral origins, it cannot measure lived experience, cultural connection, or community belonging. Being a Georgian is not simply about where your ancestors came from. It's about how you live, who you relate to, and what you carry forward. For many, identity is grounded in food, language, music, faith, and shared memory. Still, genetic knowledge is offering Georgians an opportunity to reclaim suppressed histories, honor forgotten ancestors, and build more inclusive understandings of who we are. It invites people to view identity not as fixed and binary, but as layered, evolving, and uniquely personal. In a state shaped by centuries of movement, struggle, and resilience, the intersection of genetics and identity isn't about rewriting the past. It's about deepening the story. It's about making room for complexity. And for many Georgians, that's a path toward greater understanding of themselves and each other. What this changes, the revelations from Georgia's genetic research are not just scientific, they're cultural, social, and even emotional. By shedding light on the diverse origins of Georgia's people, DNA research is reshaping how individuals see themselves and how communities understand their shared past. One major shift lies in how Georgians think about heritage. For generations, families have relied on limited historical records and oral traditions to trace their ancestry, tools that often leave gaps, especially for African American and indigenous families whose histories were disrupted or erased. With the help of genetic testing, these gaps are now being filled with new detail and clarity. People are discovering connections across racial and regional lines and learning that their family trees are more interconnected than they imagined. In education and public discourse, these findings are prompting a re-evaluation of how Georgia's history is taught and remembered. The state's narrative, once focused largely on colonial settlement, the Civil War, and the Civil Rights era, is being expanded to include the deep and complex ancestries of its people, from ancient tribal nations and enslaved Africans to recent immigrant communities. This broader lens makes Georgia's story richer, more accurate, and more inclusive. There are also implications for reconciliation. Understanding that Georgia's population is a blend of many histories, some painful, some empowering, encourages empathy and shared understanding. It reminds people that beneath surface differences, many of us are connected in ways we never expected. Ultimately, this changes how Georgians move forward. It allows for greater pride and diversity, more nuanced conversations about race and heritage, and a stronger sense of community rooted in truth. As the genetic picture sharpens, so too does the possibility of building a more united and inclusive Georgia. What Georgia's DNA tells us about the future. Georgia's genetic story isn't just about the past. It holds powerful insights about the future of the state. As science continues to map the ancestry of Georgians with increasing detail, it's becoming clear that Georgia is not just a southern state with deep roots, but a dynamic crossroads of cultures, lineages, and identities in constant evolution. the state's growing diversity is already visible in cities like Atlanta, where immigration and intermarriage are creating an increasingly complex genetic statescape. Children born today are more likely than ever to carry ancestries from multiple continents, a reality the DNA confirms and celebrates. This multicultural heritage will shape Georgia's future identity, making the state more inclusive, interconnected, and representative of global ancestry. In healthcare, genetics is opening the door to more personalized medicine. Understanding ancestry can improve diagnoses, treatment plans, and even the development of therapies tailored to specific genetic traits. For Georgians, particularly those from historically underserved populations, this has the potential to reduce health disparities and improve outcomes. Culturally, this knowledge may encourage younger generations to embrace broader definitions of who they are and where they come from. As schools, museums, and public institutions begin to incorporate genetic insights into storytelling and education, the state's next chapter may be one of deeper recognition and reconciliation. Most importantly, Georgia's DNA tells a story of resilience, movement, and shared humanity. It reminds us that the state's identity is not static. It is being written every day by the people who live, love, and grow here. In this way, the future of Georgia is not just in its history books, it's in its genes and in the openness of its people to embrace the full, beautiful complexity of their origins. If you found Georgia's hidden genetic story as fascinating as we did, don't forget to subscribe. Stay tuned for more deep dives into ancestry, history, and identity across the states. Join us on this journey of discovery. Your roots might hold more surprises than you think.